Okay, so this brief presentation is going to be a quick summary of the white paper that focuses on PM2.5 and the speciation measurements to characterize the components of PM2.5 as something that should be very important in tracking the changes in both composition and health outcomes. So as some of the speakers this morning have indicated, there have been substantial changes in the mass of PM2.5 over the last decade. In fact, if you look at the period ending in 2010, the national reduction is 27%, which indicates that a lot of the decadal improvement occurred over the last 5 years or so. And we do expect that this improvement is going to continue over the next decade. There's going to be another 9 million tons of, SO2 concentrations largely from power plants are going to reduce from the 2005 baseline from about 14 million tons to projected to be 5 million tons in 2020. We have a variety of networks that provide information on the components of PM2.5, two national networks in particular. One urban-based that is called the Chemical Speciation Network, about 200 locations, 50 or so of which are called the Speciation Trends Network, where the sites are providing long-term information. And then there's the rural network, the improved network, track regional haze, but is now a very important component of the national PM2.5 program to allow a contrast between what's going on in urban areas and the upland rural concentrations. The point worth noting is that both of these networks do not sample every day. The improved network samples every third day. The CSN network mostly samples every third day, with some of the sites sampling every sixth day. The measurements include the common suite of measurements that many of you are familiar with, a series of ion, sulfate, nitrate, some others. Measures the bulk or total organic carbon and elemental carbon, also known as black carbon, and a suite of up to 33 elements. There's a limited amount, although we don't have filter-based sampling every day. Our national networks do have co-location of continuous or semi-continuous monitors that provide information on OCEC, separately for black carbon using other instrumentation aethylometers, continuous sulfate measurements. There's also a lot of very good measurements that are taken at one of the regional privately run networks called the Search Network, which has continuous monitoring. Now, in order to understand what's going on in PM2.5, it is very important to focus on how the composition of PM2.5 has been changing. And this change is not just something that has been analyzed over the last decade, shown here, but the composition of PM2.5 probably has been changing for several decades, as the types of emission controls have changed from direct local emissions, direct emissions of PM2.5 that have probably resulted mostly in reductions of the carbon component of PM2.5, and mobile source reductions have also reduced that component. And more recently, with the emphasis on regional pollutants coming from power plants, for example, in the eastern United States, we've seen very large reductions, as described earlier, in the sulfate component of PM2.5 coming from those SO2 emissions. And this diagram shows for a subset of cities in the eastern part of the United States how the composition of PM2.5 has changed from a very high percentage of sulfate aerosol to one that is now becoming more dominated by other components as the sulfate component is declining. and this we expect to be continuing into the future. This points out the importance of looking at information on a spatial basis for several reasons. One is that PM2.5 composition is different in urban areas than the surrounding rural areas because of the proximity of urban sources of pollution that are different than some of the regional emission sources. Thus, in urban areas, there's more organic mass, there's more black carbon, there's more nitrate from those local emissions. It's also worth noting that the complex mixture of organic matter, resulting both from the direct emissions as well as a secondary organic aerosol, could not be derived from the routine measurements that we collect in these national networks. So the reductions in these regional emissions, which are also causing the residual urban PM2.5 to be more spatially heterogeneous. Many of the health studies traditionally look at single monitors or a few monitors and assume the spatial distribution of PM2.5 is the same, or the composition is the same across the urban area. While that may have been more true 10 years ago, it's certainly becoming less true as we look to the next decade. So the question for our panelists is, are there, do we need more intra-urban monitoring or other supplemental spatial surrogates to better characterize the within-city behavior? Temporal resolution is also important from several aspects. One is, as one of the speakers this morning indicated, that there's a difference in exposure depending on whether you're in the summer or in the winter, and this is also important because our pollutants are trending differently by season of the year. Sulfates reductions have been stronger during the summer, and this is going to continue, and this should be considered to some extent in the modeling. The diurnal pattern may also be changing, and this provides an opportunity for deriving new information from continuous monitoring to look at the hour-to-hour behavior of PM2.5. So how might we expand our current knowledge, both retrospectively and prospectively, of the composition of PM2.5? So one opportunity exists through the PM2.5 mass network. Although we only have 200 or so urban speciation sites, we have almost 1,000, some 900 PM2.5 mass monitors for which their Teflon filters are archived, and prospectively those filters could also be used to provide chemical composition information. Some of those analyses are not even destructive. You could do optical measurements of PM2.5 filters, something recommended to GPA, one of the HEI meetings several years ago, where black carbon could be part of the suite of measurements that are produced, and there's other opportunities for chemical composition, particularly water-soluble organic compounds or levoglucosin or other markers to help us understand the emerging importance of the non-sulfate component, the carbon component of PM2.5. So there's opportunities for new data to be collected, and there's also data that could be gleaned from existing measurements, data by which I mean looking at linear combinations or differences among the existing measurements, such as looking at the difference between sulfur derived through XRF and sulfate from IC analysis could give us some insight into the potential role of organic or organosulfates, which appears to be potentially a large component of organic mass, and that may be changing over time. So let me just leave with the list of questions that we're going to allow our panelists to ponder, looking at both the adequacy of the temporal information as well as the spatial adequacy of the existing data, and looking at the potential role of other sources of information like satellites.